So here we are today, the Elijah and the Who camera. This kid's not going to want to ride with me if I keep making him do funny things like this. But we're going to hope it gives us some good footage. Start her up. Okay, bub. So today we're going to do a little bit of a different. Had a different video planned initially for this week, but with today being Memorial Day, we're going to talk a little bit about my grandpa, who I am actually named after. Orvie J. Troyer. You know I was named after him, Elijah? So Elijah never got to meet Grandpa Orvie because he was in his mommy's tummy at that time. So every year, I don't know, do you remember how old you were when we first started putting things on the, you don't remember before that? See if we can give you a little bit more volume here. Oh wow, look at the new Melford. Fancy. We're going to ride by, look at that, kind of neat that they did there with all the graduates. So this is the town I grew up in. It's changed quite a little bit. But we're going to ride by all of our houses. You know where all my houses that I lived in here are? Okay. So the first house that I lived in was down this street. It was right at the end of this street. When we first moved to Milford, we lived in the basement of this house. This was my grandma's house. Straight ahead there. We lived there for, I think, about a year when my little brothers were babies. And my grandparents also lived in this town. That was my grandma on my mom's side, and my grandpa Orvie was not a direct relative. He was kind of adopted. He had kind of adopted us from my dad going out and doing some hunting with my uncle who lived out in Wyoming, where my dad grew up. So we'll drive by my other house and also where Mom grew up, okay? And we'll see if you can pick out, I'll tell you when we get on the street, and you tell me if you know the house when we go by it. Mine. So where this is the street, you know which house it is? That one. That was the house where I grew up. And then Mom was down this other road, and then we'll also drive by my grandparents' house. Grandpa Orvie and Grandma Arlene Troyer were their names. And my grandpa, did you know he was in World War II, Elijah? He was a soldier in World War II, and he was actually the biggest reason why both my brother Neal and I went into the service. So Neal went into the Army. Did you know Neal went into the Army? And was it? You didn't know? He was in the Army and he was a truck driver. But my grandpa was in World War II. He was actually drafted. I lived in that house too back there. That was when we moved from the one down there. We moved to that house for a couple of years. And then we moved to the one on 2nd Street. So my little bird walk there we did. So my grandpa was drafted into World War II and fought in the European theater. I don't know if he was a part of D-Day, but he always, the only story I ever got from him, he never really talked about his wartime. But the only story that I had ever gotten from him, I'll tell you after this. That is Mom's house, where she grew up. So the only story that I ever got from my grandpa about fighting in the war is he said he was had a firefight in a little town in France, and they were in the middle of the firefight, and he said some dumb idiot, I don't remember if he was coming to him from where they were firing, or if he was coming up the other way, coming up from behind them. But he said this idiot, they were in the streets fighting, and this idiot came coming up, and so they kind of covered him, and he came up, and when he got up to him, it was General Patton. You know who General Patton is? He was the big general during the World War II that led the American forces, and was kind of known as a crazy guy. So, here was my grandpa and some other guy that had covered General Patton in this town, and he said later he got called to come to the rear. So he was fighting in the front, in the front lines, and he got called to come back and received. So this is where my grandparents grew up, where they lived all when I was growing up, where Orvie lived. But my grandpa got called to the back, further back in the line, kind of what they would call the rear, and he received a battlefield commission for what they did, for the fighting that they did. He received a battlefield commission from General Patton. So that's a pretty big deal. So my grandpa went in as somebody who was forced. He was called in by the draft, so he was forced to go into the service, and he ended up getting a commission, became a commissioned officer from being in battle, which is a big deal. And he also had some water mines that blew up when they were, attacking a beach. And he had water mines that blew up, so he had both of his ankles pinned. So his ankles could only rotate this way. They couldn't twist. And that's how he lived his whole life, was that way. And he was a truck driver. That was kind of what he did after he got out of the service. He started driving trucks, and he drove trucks most of his whole entire life. Drove semis around, and he did really well. And he used to take us riding with him. He used to take us in trips. And that was the biggest reason why your Uncle Neal drives semis. He drove semis, was because of Grandpa Orvie. Kind of neat, huh? Didn't know that. So we are going to ride out to the cemetery and put flowers on both of my grandparents' graves. Something we have done since Elijah was a little whippersnapper. So we'll give you a little run through of the pictures that we've placed. Each year we would take pictures. It's been 2 years now since mostly everybody's been gone since we last did our big group. I think Amber was the last time that we did it. And this place is where my dad used to own his welding shop. So Grandpa Orby lived at that the whole time. Well, when they first got married, I guess after he got out of the service, and they had first moved back to Melford, they lived out in the country, and then later they moved into town, and then later they bought their acreage out in the country again, tore down the house that they had lived in when they first lived there, and built a new house. And we'll go by there when we go out to the cemetery. So here is the Southeast Community College, where all of your uncles, Neal went here for diesel, and Andy and Kurt went here for non-destructive testing. And this is actually, that school is actually what brought your grandpa Brian to Melford. He came to do automotive there, and there is where my grandpa, that's where they moved out to. They called it Lazy T Acres. I think now it says Lazy A Acres, but that was where they moved back out to. So here is our coming up on the cemetery. I like the cemetery and how you come in. Here would be where our Grandma and Grandpa Stauffer are. Go ahead and get off. Okay, so here we are at my Grandpa and Grandma Stauffer's, and we placed the wreath there. And now we're going to go to my Grandpa Orley and Grandma Arlene. And so here we are at my Grandpa Orby's grave. He gets decorated every year as a World War II veteran, and the metal pieces that are there were made by my dad. So thanks for joining us. Till next time, keep the sunny side up and the rubber side down. Say bye, Elijah.